Ponder is a vehicle that gets me from point A to point B.
Ponder is too slow.
Ponder is a great card in Legacy unless you're 50 years old.
I just turned 45 on...
Zach, you can only play Ponder. You can't play Ponder for 5 years.
All right.
That was-
Hey, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of our Patreon supporters out there. Thank you to the Dirtle Maniacs. If you want to be a Dirtle Maniac, go to patreon.com/eternaldurtles and help support the channel. It keeps things going. It keeps things updated. Thanks so much for watching. On with the show.
All right, guys. I'm staying up late today. I have a very special message. A couple of days ago, I watched one of your videos, and I heard something that simply just hurt my ears about Ponder and how it's doing in Legacy. So I proved a point. I top-aided 3 challenges this weekend, and I'm here to debate Ponder's case in Legacy.
Top-aided 3 challenges. All playing Ponder?
Yeah.
Well, Phil, how do you feel about that?
So when... of course, the news when we found out that we're going to have a debate about Ponder, and I'm like, oh man, I'm going to get my teeth kicked in after not knowing. My stance on Ponder is that I think right now in the early turns of the game that are the critical junctures to not lose, I think Ponder is still too slow for decks that would otherwise want to be pondering for cantrips. So I think that, to clarify from last episode, that my take on Ponder is that Ponder is no longer good in a certain swath of decks that are not trying to do something like proactive, like a combo deck, or proactive, like putting pieces together for some sort of engine, like Quarry Steel Cutter and stuff like that. So I think that Ponder is for the control decks that would typically like that kind of selection, that it is too slow because they need to keep up by advantage. So I think Ponder is unplayable now in like the types of decks and decks adjacent to what I like to play, which is the control end of the spectrum.
Well, I have a question before you go into your thesis, Andreas.
Yeah, sure.
What decks did you play?
Yeah, so that was the first thing I was going to say. So I played a Reanimator twice and the Mirror Tempo once, so I was going to clarify that for sure, because you guys also said that it's not true for the Entomb. If you're digging for Entomb, that kind of... So I'll focus in on the Mirror Tempo and the Grixis deck that won, the one I top forward. The normal Grixis Tempo took that down. A friend of mine won with like similar logic, so I'm going to focus on those two, and totally agree with you guys that the Breakfasts, the Reanimators, the Show and Tells of the world, that's not what we're talking about here. So yeah, let me just quickly try and dissect some angles that maybe you have not thought about, because later in the show I also want to talk a bit and roll out Phil's point. So Phil is very, let's call it extreme or polarized, but I think there's a lot of nuance that is also going to be useful. So I'm just going to be focusing on justifying the card, basically, from a player who I like to think I'm better than my average opponent, and why these kind of decks are good for me to play. So Ponder is a card that is a lot of things. It's part of your mana base. If you cut Ponders from your deck, you have to add a land. It's part of your blue count, so you have to think about that. It's also part of your keep range. That means basically, I'm playing against a certain deck. I have 6 forces in my deck. That means I need either a force or a cantrip. It's just some math that lets you keep more hands. So at this point, we are also looking into synergies like building a graveyard for Murktide, triggering Channeler, being a sorcery for Channeler, powering Nethergoyf. There's so many small synergies here, and especially just the fact that let's play around with it. We cut 4 cards from our deck, and then we add a threat, an answer, a land, and whatever. Then on turn 5, when we draw one of those 4 at random, it's not going to be reliably the right card, but the Ponder could be anything, because that represents all the categories of cards. You might need a land, you might need a key wasteland, you might need a force, you might need a bolt, and that could be anything during the game. So with all of that being said, I agree, having the right card to begin with is obviously better. So Ponder is not perfect, and especially with the way Magic is developing, but Ponder is a necessary evil for now to have enough keeps. You can keep a 1-lander, you can keep a 4-lander. It's kind of a glue card that does a lot for these competitive decks. We're not quite there yet, in my opinion. Ponder is still very useful.
Almost a point that I made when we did that intro, as I almost said, Ponder is a necessary evil. That's a perfect point.
Yeah, which is to say that it's not broken, perfect, or anything. It's serviceable, and it makes your fair deck have enough game, because otherwise you would be guessing with what you're adding to your deck, right? So it's just some mathematically still viable, although not a perfect tool, of course.
Finding the right high-end cards for Legacy, Vintage, Pre-Modern, or Old School Magic can be challenging. That's where a friend's 3-for-1 trading come in.
3-for-1 Trading is one of Europe's top Magic the Gathering retailers with an incredible selection of premium singles, sealed product, and even full sets, all available with free, fast, and secure worldwide shipping.
They add fresh inventory every Wednesday with weekly deals and discounts. So whether you're hunting for that elusive piece of power, a legacy staple, or something spicy for your collection, they've got you covered.
First high-end orders over $500 or €500, use the code EDFREE to get free worldwide shipping.
Check them out now at the number 3, the number 4, the number 1.gg/ED. That link takes you right to the shop and helps support the channel.
Huge thanks to 3-for-1 Trading for supporting the Legacy community. Now back to the show.
Yeah, my thoughts on the spread and how it keeps a certain range. I think that's also part of it. Similarly, like when, let's say we keep a range of hands for the section of essentially reactive decks. Like, what are we looking if we're not trying to win with a combo or be proactive in some way where we know we want to stick something on turn 2 always. Essentially, like if we look at like the Jeskai controls of the world or anything that's looking to develop into a longer game, that range of opening hand, that ponder on turn 1, unless it's like it is functioning as I need this to find the second land, that I feel like that keep now in the dark. You don't necessarily know what you're looking for. Do you need the removal spell or do you need the counter spell? And then by the time that you even, like, let's say you sandbagged that for the second turn when they show you maybe a little bit more of like what you're actually looking for, by that point, you may not have the mana or time before whatever the powerful decks in the format are doing, I've already done it.
Yes.
And then from that position, that ponder, then finding whatever answer it is potentially too late, or the range of answers that you have to whatever is that could answer what is happening doesn't have a strong enough of a catch up to deal with it. So it's like they just played an Urza Saga. I now need to use this ponder to find a wasteland. But like if they already get to make a construct, then okay, we cut them off a thing, but now I also need the thing off the construct, and now I'm way behind, and now I have to deal with the board and whatever that deck that was playing Urza Saga is doing. So that's like a fairly broad example, but I think the area where I'm thinking that ponder isn't as good anymore, and where I'm thinking like I want to learn here, where like you're talking about what are the aspects that I'm missing on ponder in the current environment, because I find that like the ponders and the openers aren't as strong if you don't exactly know what you're doing, which almost makes me like when I have information. So it's like even like in games 2 and 3, obviously it gets stronger and you have sideboard cards and everything. But like I find that in those hands where I'm like, oh, it's turn 1 ponder, and I can turn 1 ponder, or if I don't have something else to do on turn 1, whether that be some form of counter magic or like a Lorien revealed, that like the ponder is more or less just wasted. And it's like, yes, of course, on turn 5, when we're well developed, we know what we need in the context of the game. A turn 5 ponder is stellar. It's the opportunity cost of being able to go, oh, if this ponder were a Tameo, this ponder were anything else, like additional answers that, you know, essentially a ponder slot is taking up for whatever metagame you expect to encounter, that it is going to be more valuable to you in those spots in the early game. And essentially, like, to get to that point, it's like, am I just thinking incorrectly about ponder? Am I looking at like opening hands with ponder as, oh, they're actually not in the range until you know what you need in game 1s? Essentially, like, I find that the early game ponders, if it's not exactly like, oh yes, it's land plus ponder and I need this ponder to find a second land, that I'm usually naked, need to do something else. And if you don't have anything else to do or to work towards in the following turns before you're dead, then you're not going to know what to do with it. I feel clueless with ponder in the opening turns. And that's not something that I remember feeling historically. So it just feels, in that regard, too slow. That's where I get the sense of like, oh, I'm powerless. This ponder should enable me to feel powerful in the moment because I can be anything. And then what it ends up being is, oh, I'm going, oh, this is too slow. And then that's what triggered me to think about like what it was like in Vintage a couple of seasons ago when Urza Saga was still around and people were cutting their ponder before it was unbanned. But does that all make sense where like my headspace is on this?
Yeah, and I'm totally on the same wavelength. So funnily enough, I was the first one to cut ponder from my Vintage deck, exactly because in that format you have to hold up Spell Pierce, or you have to wasteland with your, at that point Urza Saga very centric in the format. So I actually never played a ponder outside of a Doomsday deck in Vintage in like years. And this is also say that we're heading in a certain direction with threats being this powerful, that then makes that you have to ponder into an answer an extra liability, right? So your experience is totally valid, but I will challenge the fact that ponder solves more than one landers when it comes to keeps, because most decks, whether you're looking to play like turn 2 Beanstalk, whether you're looking to Thoughtseize Nethergoyf on turn 2, whether you're going to Thoughtseize Wasteland on turn 2, you're always digging into something, unless your deck is like weird. I can't think of a single deck that is not interested in that. But of course, you're right. On the play with no info, you'll be guessing. This is a big downside of you cast a ponder, you see 2 fatal pushes against an unknown opponent. What are you going to do? You see 2 Force of Wills. What are you going to do? That's like the imperfectness of ponder and how cantrips work. But then again, you also talked about passing the turn. That is also a big cost. Not using your mana in today's Magic is also a big cost. So if you're passing the turn, not using your mana, then next turn pondering, then now we can actually say you spend 2 mana to churn, and at that point it becomes really bad, right? So there's some guesswork, has to do with the average metagame, right? So my point is mainly not that Ponder is perfect, it does Ponder is better than putting a threat and a removal spell and a counter spell and a what like in your deck, because between the first 5 turns, all the scenarios where you can see a Ponder, that's going to be better than that specific card unless you get lucky, basically. So it's just like a math thing. Not that it's great or perfect, it's that it's serviceable and it's needed in order to not, play too many removals or too many counters, and then it's kind of metagame dependent. Or the Saga situation you described, it's a pretty powerful. You can dig pretty deep for a Wasteland all of a sudden, maybe top 12 instead of top 8, 9. That's not bad, right? It's just odds game at the end of the day, which lets you play the game and not lose to those snowball cards like whatever, Saga Temi or whatever those are these days. So it's not perfect, and we're trending in a certain direction, but it's not come to the point that we can't play it in order to win tournaments anymore.
Yeah.
What do you think about cards like, like Rakshas's Bargain or Stock Up, where they, the potential of those cards certainly outsources what Ponder can do, but the mana efficiency isn't there?
Yeah, this has to do with the speed of the format, right? So let's say you are losing to, turn 2 Atraxa or Utal spells or getting Blood Moon turn 1 and whatever, then probably not a very good idea to play with those cards. Then it's better to play with Ponder and give yourself a chance to find that Pharah Macabre or Force of Will or Surgical or whatever negation, right? So then it has a lot to do with when you think the critical, let's call it confrontations, are going to happen during the game. And those are happening earlier and earlier on average, year by year. That's my experience anyway. So we all love to play with cards like, Bargain, Refill, Beanstalk, look at me, I have all the cards. But the thing is, the critical turns are very often before that, so we need to delay the game enough that our engine can take over. So that would be the challenge with those decks, and probably ultimately why those decks don't necessarily crush anymore. They can, of course, win from time to time, but they're not format defining like back in the day, the Miracles decks and stuff like that. But obviously, with Countertop, that's a league of its own when it comes to control tools.
I think that there's also, speaking of the pace of the format, so if you're playing up against like Reanimator or Oops or something like that, then you kind of have to assume that Ponder needs the broadest answer possible, something like a Force of Will, and hoping that it lines up. And if you were just playing, if you were like, have played this deck and I'm expecting to go in this range of decks, in which case this is a broad enough answer to cover most of those decks, then that's a reasonable thing to do in the blind, especially if you're looking to get your mana or search for something that your deck is trying to do. I think that in addition to the decks that essentially answers not being up to par with threats, and then the timing of not letting those threats actually accrue whatever advantage they're going to accrue before you remove them, and then the game becomes out of reach.
Yes.
That the additional side, like parried with that in the current metagame, is like against the broken decks, I feel like Ponder's too slow. And then against the like relatively fair decks that you run into, like I run into a lot of Orcish Bowmasters, and also if you have an Orcish Bowmaster on the table and Ponder, even if you find the answer to the Bowmaster, you now still have the additional larger threat that's chunking you. And then in that case, you would just need to draw the answer again or Ponder into another answer. And then it's like, we're so overloaded. And that's what I mean by like Ponder not being able to find the thing that can solve the problem. And it's the context of it's too slow against the decks that, otherwise you would just rather have the additional Force of Will main or the additional whatever it is that you would put in those slots instead of Ponder. And then against the fair decks, if they play Bowmaster, in response you can Brainstorm. And of course, Brainstorm we're not talking about as being too slow of a cantrip. The fact that you can still respond to get that through a Bowmaster, if Bowmaster's on the table, drawing a cantrip is obviously terrible. But like if you're holding the Ponder because you go, okay, I have to figure out on turn 5 what I need to Ponder to find, but then in just before we get to know what they need, it's a Bowmaster, unless you're thinking, I need to Ponder to find an answer to an eventual Bowmaster. But if they just have mana up, it's like really scary to do that type of play because then you get domed and then you have multiple threats on the table. So like I feel like in those positions also, because Ponder's a sorcery to walk into that I'm like, okay, it's bad against the decks where you need to figure out what to do with it early. And then it's a liability in a lot of positions against decks that know that if they're playing up against blue control in particularly, or blue mid-range particularly, that they can go, okay, I can time this Bowmaster in a way that it will control what is going on, and then just essentially make it so that those cantrips trying to find the answers to what I'm doing become even more difficult. So it's stretched in both ways. Can you talk about like the experience with that? Like essentially also, I think that we should clarify, is it just that Ponder in these types of like the decks that want to develop and go long, that's just a thing of the past, and then like we've gone the way of vintage, and if so, that's reasonable. I like want to just clarify like that sort of thing, that like this macro type of like controlled mid range that Ponder to find answers is still a viable thing. If it's not, then we just concede that, and then we talk about like the merits of Ponder within the more tempo-y decks going up against the faster combo and control decks.
Hey, Legacy fans, since you're enjoying the show, please like and subscribe the video. It helps the channel grow.
Support Eternal Turtles on Patreon so we can create even more content and cover events.
Patreons get an ad-free RSS feed, 4 bonus episodes a month, and Discord recognition. Join the Dirtle Maniacs at patreon.com/eternaldurtles.
Now back to the show.
No, it's okay. So I'll address the like controlling thing first. I still think it's a part of your land count. I still think it's part of your force count. I still think it's part of your sword supply shares count. I still think it's part of flipping a Tameo count. It does so many small things, and the fact it's just gotten less powerful. So I'm trying to acknowledge that while also trying to justify why it's still good enough for Legacy, right? When it comes to the tempo decks, I think it's a very good card against combo, but especially when you know what's going on. So games 2 and 3, it lets me keep more hands because I'm not going to play 8 forces in my deck. That's not viable. And I'm also not going to play 8 removal spells because that's not viable either. So you're totally right that some scenarios will come up where you have to ponder into Bowmaster or slow roll it. But the good thing is, so is the opponent. And then it's kind of mirrored in that way, how I see it. So it's not a down. It's like, I remember I played a lot of Pauper and I realized, oh, it's very bad to kill a creature if my opponent if it's a Muldrifter that already drew 2 cards. So then I realized, oh, my deck is also full of Muldrifters, so they have to do the same. That balances it out, right? Or Tempo Mirror. Oh, this force is really bad, but well, my opponent also has Force of Will, so we're at parity here. Can I do something smart? So it's mainly to think about Ponder as a serviceable card, nothing great to write home about, but just something that enables a lot of small things in most cohesive Legacy decks, whether you're building your graveyard, or you need a blue count, or you need a sorcery, or you need to find your 2 of Wasteland on turn 4, or you need to mulligan to 5 and keep a bad hand, but then find the force off the Ponder to save your bacon against oops. Whatever, like it comes up every tournament that Ponder is like the glue that gets me from I don't have a chance to I have a chance, right? So it's a consistency card, and that's good if you're comfortable and confident in your own ability. You want as much consistency as possible and as less variance as possible. It would be very variance-based if I signed up with 8 forces or 4 plows and 4, what do I know, Path to Exile. Bad example, but you know what I'm saying. Instead of Ponders, because then I need to hit some certain matchups in order to not look like a fool. The metagame is sometimes the removal is good, sometimes counters are good. That's why we have to do the mix and have Ponder to tie the room together.
Guys, is this feeling just the oops all spells of it all?
Explain?
Is it just because the format, the current Predator in the format is so fast that it's basically taking what would normally be a completely playable, a card that we wouldn't even be debating about, and taking it and saying like, this is maybe the worst card in my 75, right? Still very playable, but because of the speed of the format right now, that might be the issue.
I would jump in because I think that the speed of the format is suggesting what Echo was saying about before, where it's like if you don't use that mana and then you spend 2 mana to play a Ponder, that's really bad. I think the other contextual thing that I wanted to talk about when it comes to, okay, what would you put in those slots to fill a bunch of the work that Ponder is doing? Whether that's the blue count or some amount of filtering to find stuff, or you would need to add an additional land. And I think that the thing that like is also putting me in that space is if you were to add, say, 2 lands to your deck, one of which is an additional fetch, and one of which is an additional surveil land, that the essentially tap mana to look at the top cards, but like still being land count and then solving selection problem later on down the road in a similar way that Ponder does. Like the fact that we have these other tools now to support some amount of filtering, that is if we cut our 4 Ponder and we add a fetch and another surveil land and then 2 bangers, whatever that may be, would it give the context of your deck, but 2 additional threats or pieces that I'm not sure, whatever spots we need to fill, but like whatever those 2 things are, would those slots be more impactful than what Ponder is doing over the long term without the downside of what Ponder has in the early game?
Very clear no answer from me, mainly because land spell ratio is like one of the premier ways to either win or lose a game. We all know this, and Brainstorm fixes it to an extent. Ponder is the same thing. Ponder lets you keep a 1-lander, Ponder lets you keep a 4-lander. and then expect to get into the game and balance out the land spell ratio. So that's often when I look at my opener and I see 4 lands in the Ponder, I'm like, okay, so Ponder is kind of ensuring that my land spell ratio improves, and it's same with 1 land. You're looking to get into the game. So I think with +2 lands in those decks, you're gonna flood out more, and you're gonna not see that necessary wasteland or necessary force timely enough. So for me, it's very bread and butter. I want to prolong the game, and I want to give myself a chance to win the game. And if I'm mana flooded, I don't have that chance. If I don't find my answer cards timely, I don't have that chance. And then who cares if I'm the better player at the table if I'm getting comboed out, show and tell, ever animated, whatever the case may be, right? Blood mooned. So for me, that's a very clear no, and it's impossible to find that formula of removing churn, what do you call it, cogs, right? And then find the perfect, because if the metagame was that predictable, it would have been done a while ago. But actually, funny when I thought about it yesterday, when I was kind of preparing in my head for this one, traditionally, Legacy Merfolk, so now obviously we're many years back, never played Brainstorm. And that is actually, to your credit, that's exactly that logic. That deck needs to curve out, otherwise it's not good enough if you have to pay 3 mana for a Lord of Atlantis. You have to play on curve. And funnily enough, that is the beginning thoughts to the thoughts you're having right now, where being half a step behind doesn't feel very good. So funnily enough, it was already on the cards many years ago with that deck and Brainstorm.
One of the things, as a previous Merfolk player, I can attest to this.
Yeah.
Every card was the same in your deck. You just wanted more of them. You didn't. You
Exactly.
just like every
None
card
of
was a
them were
2-drop
worth
that gave
paying
every other
1 more
creature
mana for.
+1/+1. You know,
So that's super interesting, because like that makes me like you say like every card in your deck does this is the same thing, and
Yeah.
that's making me
Super
think,
redundant.
Yeah, that super redundancy I think is more so what I feel like the spread of answers that I would have available in my deck for whatever it is that I'm looking for. That spread is now, with all of the different kinds of threats in the format, my spread feels too thin for dealing with all of that. And that makes me, you're right. I think my instinct goes, because when you said Merfolk was just all the same thing, I'm thinking, yeah, I want all the same thing, but instead of 2/2s that pump my team for 1, I want just like ways that I can also snowball to essentially snowball ahead of my opponent doing anything. Rather than trying to stop their snowball, I want to like just have my snowball first.
Yes, so that's kind of a different conversation where it comes to like it's better to have the threat than the right answer, because you play some Murktide Regent, I have a Fatal Push, I look silly, right? Random example that obviously comes up every time I play like the black decks, right? That's my opponent has a Lightning Bolt, but I'm sticking a Baragoyf. Great job, right? That's the challenge of playing reactive decks always. So that's also why you see most successful decks across all formats are decks that have like their own plan. I think it started in Legacy with like Oko and Uro and stuff like that during COVID, where we really realized how important it was to have more than just 1 Entreaty Angels that kind of put the pressure on the opponent to be hard to play against. So I think that's just where most Magic formats are going, that we need different gears, because it also allows our opponent to plan in the wrong way and stuff like that. So I totally share that. That's why I mainly play decks with also a very proactive plan. Like I want my Nethergorg's, they always attack for 3. I don't want to sit back and play like Baleful Strix or like slower version, because then I'm at the mercy of the time that I'm giving my opponent to execute their stuff, right? So it's always on my mind to close out in a somewhat timely fashion in Legacy.
The best defense is a good offense. Yeah,
that's how modern Magic is for sure.
Can I ask you, when you're thinking of like, let's say you're playing a deck where your way to get across the finisher's line is I'm getting your life total down to 0. I'm not trying to compile a combo. I actually do need to interact across the finish line. When I'm really interested in what you're talking about with spell to land ratio.
Yes.
And as the format has gotten faster, where you think about what land to spell ratio has to look like in order to keep up with the pivotal turn happening, what feels like a turn cycle sooner than a year and a half ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah,
even though maybe it's not, maybe I'm just biased, but like
no, but it's heading in a direction for sure.
Yeah. So can you talk about like, when you're thinking about land to spell ratio, and at what points for a speed of a format do you have to consider addressing it in some way?
Yeah, so it's basically just to realize that how many decks are doing something you have to deal with on turn 1. Right now it's actually more or less only Oops with mono red falling a bit in the rankings. Then we have something like Breakfast, but they will telegraph it with the turn 1 Nomad, right? So we know we're not pondering into anything there that kind of dictates our sense of urgency. But I care about it a lot. I'm not going to put too many 3-drops in my decks these days, because the mana usage is big. The turn we're having some kind of confrontation that can end the game has gotten closer and closer to 0, and I like to use my mana a lot with double spelling. So double spelling is another one that's huge for modern Magic that it took me many years to realize what that means. But that means that I can play a threat and a Thoughtseize on turn 2. That's amazing. If another player is only playing one spell, I'm playing 2 spells, because every card in our decks are good. But if I play them faster than my opponent, that's a way to address things being fast, because you don't get any extra points to die with 2 Rakshas's Bargain in hand, right? That's unfortunate. You don't get any extra points for that, even though I love that Magic with all of my heart. I play control whenever I get the chance. So that's just the reality of the situation, that dying with cards in hand, that's very popular, but it's very it happens these days when people build their decks planning for turns. Oh, then I'll take over the game. Yes, but how did you get into the game? We need a lot of tools to get into that game, right? So yeah, I think about it a lot, that I can't mess around, so to speak.
So when in regards to ponder for land to spell ratio,
Yes.
if you're when thinking about like how much like the significance of how ponder smooths in our faster world, when you're looking at a ponder in let's talk about your Grixis Tempo deck with your ponders and how many lands it was. Do you know when you sit down with your land to spell ratio, what percentage of that ponder is a land and what percentage of that ponder is something else?
So if I cut four cantrips like Ponder from my deck, I would. It's like 1.25, 1.5, something along those lines. I think 4 baubles is like 1 land, and then Ponder digs deeper. They're worth a bit more.
Okay, so like the estimate would probably be around. It's like you're saying that's like 1.25 lands is a ponder.
Yeah, or 1.5 maybe.
1.5.
In that range, yeah.
Yeah. Zach, have you like noticed anything similar when you're playing? Because you've been piloting a lot of Breakfast. Like, do you have a sense of like when you're cantripping with Ponder, how much that Ponder is a land versus like a spell more often than not?
Yeah, well, the funny thing about that deck is when you're playing that deck, you're playing 19 or 20 lands, generally 20, and 3 of your lands are worthless other than the fact that they're tutors for your Shuko for mana for the most part. Like, yeah, you can cast, your colorless part of a couple spells off it,
stick around.
Yeah. You do have to realize that, like, if you're not playing with Ponder, it's not fixing your mana base, and that deck is trying to play 4 colors, basically, like with the colorless lands in there. So you really need the Ponders for mana fixing as well as, finding your combo.
Yeah, I think that the spell to land ratio that I'm essentially what I'm like asking about Breakfast and then versus asking about Grixis Tempo to get to is if the value in Grixis Tempo is that a Ponder is approximately 1.25 lands of what it's doing versus anything else, versus in Breakfast, like how much of a land is it worth in that deck? Where that is looking to assemble 2 pieces together. To get a little bit further nuanced with the Ponder conversation, like rather than being like, oh yeah, Ponder is entirely unplayable, or no, the Ponder is still doing all of these glue things that's keeping it together. I agree with like all these points that you've made. Your takes are more nuanced and thought out than like as extreme as I was last episode. I essentially
so.
like I'm
Phil,
asking.
Phil is a club, and you're a scalpel, is what we're saying.
And that's the thing. And now that we have the scalpel with us, I want to get a little bit tighter. Essentially, like, is there value in this conversation with talking about what Ponder is bringing to the table in a deck that isn't looking to assemble a very specific piece that ends the game immediately?
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Like, is there the value in trimming that Ponder, going down the percentage on the land spell ratio for a land to then add whatever might be an additional threat to offset the fear that I have of like that opening thing where I don't have a proactive play that will let me 2 spell later on?
Yeah, but the deck has to be quite specific for that. I have a friend who plays a Dreadnought deck with Ancient Tomb in it. He has Torpor Orbs and Stock Ups, so that means he has his blue count under control. So Ponder is not that great in the deck because a lot of your sequencing are also around like pondering and then developing an Ursa Saga. That means no shuffle, right? Or pondering, playing Ancient Tomb, then something else. That means no shuffle. So that would be a deck where it's totally fine to cut Ponders because it kind of has the stompy merfolk kind of philosophy where your cards are best on curve, right? Paying 1 more to then play a Doorkeeper Thrall is less powerful, or 1 more to then play a Torpor Orb is less powerful than jamming it. So we can maybe imagine a world where there exists some kind of red Ponder. I don't think you would play that in Mono Red Prison because those cards need to get played on curve. It's the same thing basically. It's like the merfolk scenario. So your deck would have to be very specific. But I know you also like controlling decks, and the problem with that is the controlling decks needs the right pieces at the right time. So Ponder is a way to up that consistency. So I'll probably just circle back to you will need Ponder to have the Force on time, or the Plow on time, or the Supreme Verdict on time or whatever you like to play, right? So it's mainly that it's very hard to cover all bases with your reactive deck these days. That's kind of where this conversation probably started, also from your interest in reactive decks and controlling the game, and like your favorite gameplay is probably that. Pretty good guess, right?
Yeah,
So,
there's like the space that I want to go, because I'm thinking is in the particular scenario, let's say I cut, okay, I'm down to 3 ponder, and I have added a spell pierce. And now that in my opening hand, I open fetch spell pierce, one of those ponders. But now I have access to be able to go fetch and use a surveil land as a way to like functionally use that ponder without going down that tempo, without that mana.
Yep.
Am I thinking like is that too nuanced and it's just super deck dependent, or is that like like cutting? We're at the point where like cutting ponder isn't crazy talk, because like the moment that you told us you had gotten part of the way through the episode and then we're like already tapping on your keyboard, I was like, okay, so I probably was a bit too extreme if that's what was going on, and I can understand that. But like I'm thinking that like my experience and my instincts are such that like are we in the territory where like going down to 3 ponder to start fitting in a bit more answers early on is a way that we have to respect the metagame?
The metagame has to be very specific. So let's say Spell Pierce is amazing. There's a lot of like, I don't know, stock ups or beanstalks or, you know, stuff like that are you need more than just forces for, right? Then you can argue for it. But let's say the metagame doesn't run that many wastelands because those decks are focusing on their own plan, etc. Then you can get into a spot where, oh, this is actually there's not that many days wasteland decks around. This is probably better because these decks pressure us, and it's I mean, it can be done for sure, but Legacy is just too, like, if you go to a paper Legacy tournament, you'll play against every strategy possible, right? You'll try and get stormed out one round, and then some dark depth strategies, and you know, then you play against Mystic Forge or Controlled Mirror, Breakfast. Paper Legacy, I think that would be impossible, but I can see a metagame for sure online where this card really makes sense right now, and it's competing with Ponder on turn 1. Can I get away with this? Okay, maybe this is not that bad. Like I can see it, but I don't think we're there, because then let's see, in the experiment you said -1 ponder, +1 pierce. So that means that 25% of the time in the mid game when you would have drawn a ponder, you draw that card, and that's probably quite bad because that's the bread and butter situation. I'm always looking at, so the opening hand, that's going to be 25% of the time when you see a ponder, it's going to be that card, like a ponder slot, right? But the same is also true for the rest of the game. So Pierce might be better in some opening hands, but it's pretty bad in the mid game compared to that turn 5 ponder we discussed earlier. So at that point, it just disqualifies it in some way, unless the metagame you really need to Pierce on turn 1.
Yeah.
In which case you would play more than one. So.
Right. Yeah, in which case, if we're at that position, the format is a lot faster, and then you need to.
Yeah.
Is a lot faster than what we think it is right now.
Yeah, and it's also people playing creatures. Like turn 1 is not necessarily something you can catch with Spell Pierce, so it's just a bit too diverse for that. But I can see a world where that is viable for sure in Ponder. But the metagame becomes so that we can run 8 forces, we can run maybe Spell Pierces, right? That's possible. Some Brian Cook takes over the world, then maybe, like, who knows? Maybe that's.
Well, speaking of shout outs, I wanted to mention, because there was another person in the comments, coming in for the Keyboard Dojo, and I think you alluded to this person. Harain is that person, right? Like, yes. who is off of Ponder and onto this Tomb Dreadnought situation.
Also in the comments, I remember too, because I thought you were just about to bring up the Storm guys that were like, yeah, we cut Ponders for gambles a long time ago. Essentially, the only blue card that has remained in Storm is Brainstorm.
That's actually a cool development to highlight. Where if Ponder is just going to be a bad tutor for a certain payoff, then why not just get to business, right? So I like that deck building.
I think that maybe that too also extends to like the feelings that I was having that fueled last episode, where it's like when you're playing a more reactive deck, that Ponder does have to function like the tutor for the answer that you need. And then because the answers feel like they just aren't up to snuff with the spread of the threats in the format, that the tutor of Ponder has just gotten a lot worse in those types of strategies. And that also lends itself to why those strategies have really struggled the last several formats. I mean, we're seeing a bit more Beanstalk right now, but
yes.
I think that Beanstalk is in a lot of ways an engine deck and is very much contingent on finding that Beanstalk. Like the games where you have Beanstalk are astronomically different from games where you don't, at least in my experience when I play them.
Oh, I agree. That's the nightmare scenario when they
right?
Because they don't, I like my chances.
Yeah. And so I think that like in that world where it's like maybe Rakshasa's bargain is doing enough in the world of like, okay, if we have like the force and we can open up and then get to a Rakshasa's bargain, that essentially can sort of function as like pseudo beanstalks 5 through 8 in ways where you're like, okay, at least I can play to this and then get an engine going. But I think that like that also speaks to where I think that Ponder is falling out. And as a product of that, so have the longer game control decks.
Yeah.
Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I totally agree. So in that deck, Ponder is your blue card. Ponder is your way to have more turn 2 beanstalks, because we all agree that's the best thing you can be doing. So that's like how you justified there. And you also alluded to in the beginning the is it cutter decks. Again, we have a key card. Our win rate skyrockets when we have that card. Again, then we are kind of in the muddy waters of, do we count that as a combo or Zach's approach from Breakfast, or do we? So again, I think it also has to do with where you're coming from and which decks you like to play, because I don't mind dazing people, casting Nethergoyf, ninjing in Kaito, forcing a key spell and winning the game, and Zach is trying to win with Oracle, right? And so I think it has a lot to do with that as well, and I can see why you're struggling with Ponder in your deck, because you have a big task already keeping up, and then Ponder is just adding attacks to that, if that makes sense. So totally see where you're coming from.
Yeah, I wanted to keep leaning in on the Storm guys that cut Ponders for gambles and just having more tutors. And that if in the control decks, like let's say that Beanstalk is the only viable way to do that sort of like game that wants to go very long, like grind you into the dust type game. Yep. If we assume that Beanstalk is the only way to do that in the format, but like in addition to now having the London Mulligan and knowing that the games between having a Beanstalk versus not having a Beanstalk are so vast that if we were to go, okay, we need to have Beanstalk to be viable or to like make it so that like we're actually doing what we want to do.
Yes.
Is then the world of like, okay, if Ponder on turn 1 is always going to look for the Beanstalk, then rather than be like, okay, I'm hoping that this Ponder can connect, instead, if we have an engine like Beanstalk to then move into be like, okay, well, why wouldn't I just play? This is just an example of a broader idea.
Yeah.
But like, what if I play Enlightened Tutor to find Beanstalk? So I can always go turn 1, put the Beanstalk on top, turn 2, play that Beanstalk. And like of course there's card disadvantage and stuff that we have to figure out there, mana considerations that you have to figure out. But like the fact that like I know that my mana will be used to find the thing that I need to get my deck online immediately. And then if I remember it was Sam Black who was talking about playing Worldly Tutor to get Argivian Enchantress in pre-modern for the Enchantress deck. And he was like, am I willing to, if I know I need this on turn 2 is the way that I am always at my best, would I be willing to mulligan a Worldly Tutor in order to ensure that I have a higher range of hands that always have that play on turn 2? And that's making me think, is like that a world where it's like, is this a reasonable idea that like, oh, Ponder's too slow, therefore I want this other thing that is a lot of times bad, but like in these sort of positions can make it so that the deck is actually leveled up?
So the best answer I can say is your ideas lack a bit of nuance. Like, let's say you play 100 games where it's more, yes, you can have Spell Pierce in your opener. Yes, you can turn to Beanstalk with Enlightened Tutor if you work the mana base. Like, that is it's not necessarily unique scenarios, but it's specific scenarios, right? So it's more like, I needed double force against this combo deck, but this was an Enlightened Tutor. Too bad, it hurt my blue count. Or now I have this one lander I have to send back because it's an Enlightened Tutor and it's not a Ponder. Or now I draw this card on turn 5 and I have to find something now, but I can't because that's Enlightened Tutor. So it's more it's just across the board. It's just better to draw the card you need on time than to ponder for it. That's not up for discussion. But if you're trying to get more lucky with adding like specific, let's say, virtual copies, extra copies of it, you're just giving up a lot for it, which I don't think is even close to being worth it. I think it's because Ponder can do so many things. So it's not a tutor, but in a Storm deck, like you alluded to, let's say there was a 1-mana blue card that tutored for a creature with 1 power. You will probably play that in Breakfast, right? So it's just not specific. The tutor's not specific enough, because sometimes you need to handle the opponent, you need to force the opponent, you need to wasteland, you need to find your sideboard card on time, you need to do all of that stuff that comes up in a game of Magic that isn't the specific scenario where efficiency and is the key, and necessarily it's more the flexibility that's the key, and then you pay the tax, which is not amazing, but it works for now.
Yeah, I think look. So I think what I've learned so far, because everything that you've said, I've been like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Is there is a reasonable sense that I have been upset with how Ponder has functioned in the archetypes that I enjoy playing, and then therefore gaslit it as something like coming out really hot against it last episode. Because you're right in the scenarios that like I've realized from our conversation right now that like all the times that I'm talking where I don't like Ponder are the times now where Ponder is worse, and as we talked about, like it has gotten worse over time.
Yes.
But that it's not worse. It is not so much such that we should be cutting it, even though those situations feel a lot harsher than they may have used to.
Yeah, you also said something on the last episode where you play against a tempo deck, they go turn one Ponder, and it is like a sigh of relief.
Mm-hmm.
Totally agree. Yeah, totally agree. That is
the happiest moment of my day.
Exactly, but that is more a testament to how powerful the other things that they can do than, oh wow, Ponder sucks. It's more like the other cards are a lot more scary, right?
I think that's the. I was looking at it from the other point of view of like whenever somebody does cast Ponder and I go, oh, a sigh of relief, and vice versa. Like I feel when I have to Ponder and it feels so much softer than they just deployed a threat and now I have to wait a turn and that threat's going to get a card. You know, it's like I think that I was upset at that scenario as opposed to the other way around. I mean, glass half empty, glass half full. Like I'm looking at it. Oh, this Ponder feels so much worse but that's a reflection of the other cards, not necessarily the Ponder. And then it's just contextual of the Ponder in relation to those cards.
It's a fun one. I play a lot of Vintage Cube, and a friend of mine said, oh, look at this deck. This is the worst Black Lotus deck ever, which is funny because it is not a good Black Lotus deck compared to others, but
sure.
Come on now. Beggars can't be choosers. So it's more that perspective I'm thinking with the Ponder that, yes, this Ponder was not perfect. I wish I played a Channeler or a Thoughtseize, but now I play a Ponder, and that's going to do me well in other games, bridging the gap to whatever I need at certain times, right?
Yeah. I think you said it best. I'll paraphrase you. Ponder, the best card, the worst card that you have to still play.
Yeah, I mean,
pretty much, right?
Yep.
All right.
I agree about that. I don't think it's great, but it's winning tournaments every weekend and probably will for a while.
I'll shake hands there. I think this brought me back a little bit from the depths of tragedy that I was in.
That's good to hear. So you'll be rearranging your terminus before we know it.
Yeah. I'll be hopefully like the world corrects itself before you guys ever see me having to register 3 Ponder. But I appreciate you pulling me back from the brink.
Definitely, yeah. It was a pleasure.
Andreas, thanks for coming on, man. Always a pleasure to have you. Always a pleasure to have you calm Phil down a little bit. I think it goes without saying.
Yeah, for sure. I enjoyed quite a bit. Always uncovering nuance about Magic and trying to understand where each of us are coming from. Like, I consider myself a grinder, plays day in, day out, living and breathing the game, and then you guys come from a little bit of a different place, but we have a shared passion, so we can go on here and inspire each other. I think that's cool.
I think,
of course, we'll have your links below. So anybody who's watching us probably knows who you are. But all the links are in the description below to check out Andreas's channel as well.
Zach, we had one of our comments. I think it was from the past episode where I think I was going off. It probably was the Ponder episode, right? Where I'm going off and Zach is listening, and somebody was like, "It's funny to think that the guy who's recording from his closet just has the guy with the glasses as his therapist."
I think the exact quote was, I like to pretend like glasses guy is closet guy's therapist.
And I think what actually is more accurate, I think, is when Andreas comes on, and I think you're our therapist. You bring us back up. We just lay on the couch, we tell you our problems with Ponder, and you're like, no, your relationship with Ponder is going to be fine. You're going to have some struggles, but you still need to show each other love every day.
I funnily enough, have worked in that industry for 15 years before becoming a pro Magic player, so I have calmed down a few individuals in my time.
Perfect. All right, well, thank you everybody for watching, and we will catch you on the next one. Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, hit the subscribe button. It grows the legacy content ecosystem we all love by relaying to the platform that you are part of our passionate community.
And to go even further, click the links for subscription or to support directly via Patreon to help us create more content for you. Patreon supporters get 4 exclusive extra episodes per month. If you're listening on an audio platform, head over to patreon.com/eternaldurdles.
Thanks so much for your support.
We'll see you in the next one.